Hello aviators, how are you today? My name is Magnar Nordahl, I'm an airline captain. Today I will talk about a subject that is a growing concern for every pilot as they are getting closer to retirement age. The medical. Will I pass the next time? Or will I have to retire from flying too early? I am over 60 years, so I go through this process every 6 months. Last time I had my aviation medical check, the doctor looked at the lab reports and said, "Your LDL cholesterol is too high." And I replied, "So what? My blood pressure is normal, I do not smoke, my blood glucose is normal, I am insulin sensitive, my HDL is normal, and my triglyceride level is low." The doctor said that I was at risk for cardiovascular disease because of my high LDL cholesterol, my age, and because I am a man. He recommended me to take a statin drug. I have been through this before. About 25 years ago, my aviation doctor put me on a statin drug to lower my cholesterol. Some years later, I saw a doctor who urged me to stop. "Do you want to have cancer instead?" he asked. I didn't believe him and continued to take the drug. But what if the doctor was right? And exactly what is cholesterol? So I started to read. I listened to doctors, experts with long experience. Long story short, I stopped taking the statin drug. And with the knowledge I have today, I will never take it again. Back to my last medical examination. I told the doctor I will not take the drug, repeating that my other numbers were normal. The doctor cut me short, saying, "I don't want to discuss with you." And he signed a medical. Yes, I have high cholesterol, but I am not worried about this. In this video, I will explain why. And just to make it clear, I am not a healthcare professional. I just like to read. You may disagree with me, and that's okay. I have put a list of references below here. Many of the references comes from Dr. David Diamond. He is a neurologist turned cholesterol expert. It started when his doctor recommended him to take statin drugs. Being a medical professional, Dr. Diamond wanted to know more about cholesterol and the effect of statin drugs. Over the years, he had read thousands of medical journals. And what he discovered is a story about misinformation, fraud, and greed. Fasten your seatbelt, because this story will shock you. Once upon a time in the United States of America, more and more middle-aged men literally started to drop dead on the sidewalks from heart attack. At that time, very little was known about this. In 1955, when the US President Dwight D. Eisenhower got a heart attack, it suddenly became important to find a cause for the disease. Eisenhower was a chain smoker, but at that time, tobacco was not considered to be a health risk. Even doctors promoted cigarettes at that time. So what caused a heart attack? A man stood up and said he had the answer. His name was Ancel Keys. Ancel Keys was born in 1904. He had degrees in economics, political science, and marine biology. However, his main work was in the field of human nutrition. In the 1950s, he formulated the following hypothesis. Americans eat too much fat, and most of that is saturated fat, the kind that increases blood cholesterol, damages arteries, and leads to coronary disease. This is the lipid hypothesis. Eating saturated fat will increase your blood cholesterol, and high blood cholesterol causes cardiovascular disease. Keys presented this as a fact, and he supported this with this figure. It shows the higher the consumption of fat, the higher the mortality rate caused by heart disease. But there was a problem, a tiny little problem. To produce this graph, Ancel Keys used data from 6 countries, but the database consisted of 22 countries. Oops. Believe it or not, but he got away with it. Ancel Keys became the leader of nutrition and cardiovascular research in America. He became the member of the board of directors of the American Heart Association. and he was on the front cover of Time magazine. How was that possible? Well, Ansel Keys was handsome and he knew how to pose on TV. The housewives adored him. Ansel Keys was known to be persuasive and stubborn. He never accepted no as an answer, and he ridiculed those who disagreed with him. And he repeated his idea until people started to believe him. A lie doesn't become truth if many people believe in it. The American Heart Association is a private organization founded by a group of doctors in 1924. The beginnings were humble, but this changed when they received sponsorship from Procter & Gamble, the manufacturer of Crisco, a product made from refined cottonseed oil. By the way, unrefined cottonseed oil is toxic and was used to lubricate machines. With help of money from Procter & Gamble, the American Heart Association started to promote Ansel Keys' ideas, which meant we should replace animal-based fats with plant-based fats, like seed oils, cold vegetable oils, and margarine. I was born in 1960, and I grew up on bread, potatoes, cornflakes, lean meat, margarine, low-fat milk, low-fat cheese, low-fat yogurt, low-fat this, low-fat that. Not only was the American Heart Association sponsored by manufacturers of processed foods like Crisco, they also received donations from the pharmaceutical industry. Pfizer, for example, benefits heavily on the American Heart Association's recommendation to keep our cholesterol levels very low. Pfizer has sold statin drugs, Lipitor, for over $1 billion. This year, in 2024, the American Heart Association celebrates 100 years. On the website we can read they celebrate a century of progress against cardiovascular disease. Really? If they have made good progress, why are heart disease and stroke the biggest killers in the world? And why is it increasing? The answer is that American Heart Association is on the wrong track. Cholesterol is not the problem. The killer is white and addictive. No, I'm not talking about cocaine. In 2016, it was revealed that in the 1960s, the Sugar Research Foundation sponsored research by Harvard scientists that downsized the harmful effects of sugar and put the blame for cardiovascular heart disease on saturated fats. The result was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1967, with no disclosure of the funding from the sugar industry. Why did it do that? The answer is greed. In 1954, the president of the Sugar Research Foundation gave a speech describing a great business opportunity. If Americans could be pursued to eat low-fat diet for the sake of their health, they will need to replace that fat with something else, sugar. He predicted America's sugar consumptions per capita could go up by a third. It did. Go to your nearest supermarket and check how much sugar they have put in the food. This barbecue sauce contains 41.3% sugar. Did you believe that? The food industry is not interested in our health. Since sugar is cheap and addictive, it is used to increase the profit. I was a sugar addict in most of my life, and even after I reduced my sugar intake by 80 to 90% many years ago, I still have cravings. In 1957, John Yudkin, professor of nutrition at Queen Elizabeth College in London, published a paper where he argued that the closest relationship between coronary deaths and any single dietary factor was not with fat but sugar. When Ansel Keys presented his lipid hypothesis, Yudkin ironically responded that the closest correlation with heart disease was the number of radio and TV licenses in the United Kingdom. In 1972, Yudkin published the book Pure, White and Deadly, explaining the adverse effects of sugar. He suffered a lot of criticism at the time, especially from the sugar industry, processed food manufacturers, and Ansel Keys, the superstar. He ridiculed Yudkin's work. But Yudkin was right. and in later years his observation came to be accepted. And now it's getting interesting. In 1968, Eisenhowers initiated a large randomized control trial, replacing butter and saturated fats from animals with margarine and corn oil in an intervention group. 9,423 men and women aged from 20 to 97 years participated. The trial ended in 1973. The conclusion of the study was that the intervention group, those who were eating corn oil and margarine, had a significant reduction in serum cholesterol. The average reduction was 13.8%. The trial was a success. Or was it? In 2013, the raw data from the trial were discovered and published in 2016 with the title Re-evaluation of the Traditional Diet Heart Hypothesis, Analysis of the Recovered Data from Minnesota Coronary Experiment. While eating corn oil and margarine caused a significant reduction in serum cholesterol, it had a serious side effect. For each 30 mg per deciliter reduction in serum cholesterol, there was a 22% higher risk of death. Yeah. Conclusion: while it is possible to lower your cholesterol, it does not protect you from dying. In fact, it increases the risk. No wonder why Eisenhowers did not publish those data. Vegetable oils are made of seeds from plants like sunflower, canola, safflower, cotton, palm kernel, corn and soybeans. Raw seed oil is not edible and must be refined. This is a process where the oil is treated with chemicals and heated up to 270 degrees Celsius. When vegetable oil is heated, it becomes vulnerable to oxidation. The longer the oil is heated, the worse it gets. Fast food restaurants use the same oil for a week or longer. Then, the oil is given for free to the street vendors, at least in Thailand. The oxidation process transforms the oil into free radicals, which are harmful to the body. You may have heard about antioxidants, right? They are found in vegetables and fruits. Antioxidants neutralize the effects of free radicals. The problem is that we are getting too much free radicals from the before mentioned oils, as well as tobacco and other pollutions. Healthy vegetable oils are cold pressed, for example olive oil and coconut oil, and they are called extra virgin oils. Another problem with vegetable oils is that they contain a lot of omega-6. In a balanced diet, we should eat the same amount of omega-3 as omega-6. But the Western diet contains a lot more omega-6 than omega-3, maybe 20 to 1. The result is chronic inflammation. Then we have margarine. It is made from seed oil, but since the oil is a thin liquid, it must be made thicker. This is done by a process called hydrogenation, where the oil is heated in near vacuum and bombarded with hydrogen atoms. The result is a solid or semi-solid fat that is used in margarine, cookies and other baked products. Despite the health problems associated with vegetable oils and margarine, the American Heart Association recommends margarine over butter. They are warning against saturated fat. Even studies show the opposite. Animal foods contain cholesterol. Some good sources are egg, full-fat cheese, sardines and shellfish. But there is a cholesterol scare in the world. Even plant-based foods are labeled zero cholesterol. Some people believe that we should restrict the cholesterol we receive from our food. But even American Heart Association admits, I quote, studies have not generally supported an association between dietary cholesterol and cardiovascular risk. Eggs are healthy. After all, they consist of every ingredient required to create life. And cholesterol is just one of them. Mothers are recommended to breastfeed their babies because the milk contains all the nutrients the baby needs. Mother's milk is rich in cholesterol. Cholesterol is life. This is one of my favorites. In 1948, the National Heart Institute started a long-term study of the residents of the city of Framingham in Massachusetts. The study started with 5,209 men and women aged between 30 and 62 years. At the time of the first examination, none of them had a history of heart attack or stroke. This study is still ongoing. In 1971, this graph was published. It shows that average total cholesterol in the population is 220 mg per deciliter. The graph also shows that people with low cholesterol has the same risk for cardiovascular disease as people with high cholesterol. In other words, the cholesterol level is not associated with the risk for cardiovascular disease. Yep, there is a slight spike around 300 mg per deciliter in the graph, but otherwise they are almost the same. Therefore, using the cholesterol level alone is not a good indicator for the risk factor for cardiovascular heart disease. And in 2007, the Framingham Heart Study produces this. Here they compared LDL cholesterol, LDL-C, and LDL particle number, LDL-P, with the probability for an event-free survival, in other words, the possibility of not dying from cardiovascular disease. The groups with a high survival rate are those with low LDL-P, regardless of LDL-C. The groups with the highest mortality rate are those with a high LDL-P, regardless of LDL-C. As you can see, those with low LDL cholesterol are at the top and bottom of this graph. The paper concluded in a large community-based sample, LDL-P was a more sensitive indicator of low cardiovascular disease risk than either LDL-C or non-HDL-C. So what is LDL particle size then? When talking about cholesterol, we often hear that LDL cholesterol is bad and HDL cholesterol is good. So what are they? LDL stands for low density lipoprotein, and HDL stands for high density lipoprotein. Fats like cholesterol and triglycerides are not soluble in water. Therefore, they are transported in the blood by lipoproteins. A lipoprotein is a particle made up of proteins, phospholipids, triglycerides, and cholesterol. A lipoprotein is like a delivery truck, transporting triglycerides and cholesterol to the recipients. Triglycerides are the main components of body fat. Carbohydrates contain glucose, which is used as energy. Excessive glucose is transformed into triglyceride and stored as fat. A high level of triglycerides in our blood means we are eating too much carbohydrates. Cholesterol is used to produce cell membranes, hormones, and bile acid. It is also involved in the synthesis of vitamin D and works with the white blood cells in the immune system. The reason why we find cholesterol in the artery walls is that it works with the immune system to repair damage caused by inflammation and pathogens. Would you blame the fireman for the fire they are trying to put out? A large portion of our cholesterol is in the brain. It is important for our cognitive function. Most of our cholesterol is produced in the liver and transported to the recipients with the LDL particles. Excessive cholesterol is returned to the liver with HDL particles. And here are two facts you may not be aware of. 1. LDL and HDL transport the same cholesterol. 2. There is good LDL and there is bad LDL. Not LDL cholesterol, but LDL particles, LDLP. Good LDL is large and fluffy, and it keeps us alive. Bad LDL is small and dense. It is oxidized and can cause calcification in our blood vessels. In other words, it is the small-sized LDL particles that is the problem. To transport the same amount of cholesterol, you need few good LDL particles or many small bad LDL particles. So a low LDL-P number is good. A high LDL-P number is bad. According to this report, it is the small LDL particles that are dangerous, not the amount of cholesterol. Another thing to think about. Cholesterol levels tend to increase as we get older, and the higher the cholesterol, the longer we live. So why do the doctors ignore this? And why cannot we be tested for LDL particle size in many countries? I live in Thailand, and so far I have not found a clinic that can do this test. The same applies to the Maldives, where I am working. Good question. Like pilots, doctors must keep themselves updated with new science and regulations. According to National Institute of Health, more than 1.8 million medical articles are published every year. You see the problem here? Maybe it's not so bad to be a pilot after all, so the doctors prefer to follow the guidelines from the health authorities. In the United States, the American Heart Association is a major contributor to the health advices given by the US health authorities. They use LDL cholesterol together with other risk factors as a guidance. If you exceed those numbers, you are recommended to take statin drugs. Some doctors even recommend all men aged 18 and above to take this drug as a precaution. Despite an increasing use of statin drugs, cardiovascular disease is on the increase. How come? Listen to Dr. David Diamond.
Now that's 1961. Here it is, now 2019. That same information is now being put forth. You go to the American Heart Association website. The same information is still there. They are demonizing saturated fat. They're recommending an ultra-low fat diet. They're still recommending margarine over butter at this present time. And why? The American Heart Association is a private organization not beholden to anybody but their sponsors. They have no interest in the health of Americans. They have an interest in supporting their sponsors, which includes the corn and soybean oil industry and the pharmaceutical. This is what I have now learned in the past 10 years.
I recommend you to watch the entire video. There is a link below. Because of the American Heart Association and the US health authorities, and because many other countries are following the Americans, we are told that statin drugs can prevent heart disease. So what is a statin drug and what effect does it have? This advertisement kick-started one of the most successful campaigns in the medical history. Lipitor alone has generated more than $100 billion in revenue. It says Lipitor reduces risk of heart attack by 36%. But do you notice the asterisk behind the number? Look at the small text below. That means in a large clinical study, which by the way was paid by Pfizer, the manufacturer of Lipitor, 3% of patients taking a sugar pill or placebo had a heart attack compared to 2% of patients taking Lipitor. The difference between 3% and 2% is 1%, right? So how does this become 36%? The actual numbers are 3.0% and 1.9%. So the difference is 1.1%. That is called the actual risk. When you divide 1.1 with 3, you get 36%. This is called relative risk. So the drug may say 1 of 100, but is it worth it? Let us look at the effects of statin drugs. They block an enzyme the liver needs to make cholesterol. This causes the liver to remove cholesterol from the blood. Statin drugs also make the blood thinner, and that may be a good thing if you want to reduce the risk for a second cardiovascular event. Then we have the not so good effects of statin drugs. They reduce the body's production of many hormones, including sex hormones. One of Pfizer's best-selling drugs is Viagra. Statin drugs reduce the body's production of coenzyme Q10. This is a substance that helps convert food into energy. CoQ10 is found in almost every cell in the body, and it is a powerful antioxidant. When taking statin drugs, we are recommended to take supplemental coenzyme Q10. The risk of cancer is significantly associated with lower achieved LDL levels. Let that sink in. Furthermore, statin drugs may increase the risk for type 2 diabetes. One paper reported an increased risk by 46%. Statin drugs may accelerate dementia. This paper reports that cognition improved when old patients were taking off statin treatment. And when they started taking statins again, their condition worsened. Statin drugs may also cause muscle pain. I have experience with that. And in rare cases, they may cause muscle damage or liver damage. Do you now understand why I do not want to take statins anymore? To support my view, I will mention a study from South Korea with 12.8 million participants, which shows the association between all-cause mortality and total cholesterol levels. It shows that people with the lowest mortality rate have a total cholesterol of 230 mg per deciliter, plus minus 40, so from 190 to 270. What the study does not show are all the other risk factors for cardiovascular disease. This figure from the World Health Organization shows the highest risk factors for cardiovascular disease death. The highest risk factors are high blood pressure and tobacco. Then follows high blood glucose, or blood sugar, physical inactivity, overweight, and obesity. And on the sixth place, high cholesterol. The problem with the American Heart Association is that they are corrupted by the sponsors, which includes the vegetable oil industry and the pharmaceutical industry. Some time ago, I spoke with a man from Sweden. He supplies medical equipment to hospitals. And he said, "We don't listen to the Americans anymore." And in Norway, my home country, the doctors have more or less stopped prescribing statins. There is one exemption though. If you had a cardiovascular event, you may be prescribed a low-dose statin drug, because as I said, statin drugs makes the blood thinner. I could have said a lot more about this subject, but I think you understand my opinion about cholesterol and statin drugs. When you take time to check the facts, you will discover that cholesterol, despite the reputation, is not an enemy, but essential for life. So what is the status today? More and more doctors understand that cholesterol is not so bad after all. And health authorities around the world have started to recommend less sugar in our diet. That is good. But they are still recommending a low intake of saturated fat. I disagree with that. If you want to follow doctors with a better understanding of nutrition and health than me, I recommend the following: Dr. Erik Berg, Dr. Sten Ekberg, and Dr. Annette Bosworth, Dr. Boss. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day at your medical examination, and happy landing.
200. 100. 50, 40, 30, 20,